word invoked images of the Industrial Revolution and the early 20th century, images of passive, dependent factory workers who had nothing to do with leadership. And because this is not a pretty picture, it became sort of taboo. It became the F word of leadership studies. However, due to the work of scholars and professors around the world, that connotation is changing. Followership is now an area of study that attributes qualities to follower roles that are just as attractive and valuable as those of a leader. This recognition is growing so much that the phenomenon we casually refer to as a leadership is now deliberately referred to as a leader-follower relationship or exchange. However, there is a vital element of this relationship that has gone almost entirely ignored or misused in the field up until this point. Another piece of taboo. This one is the S word. Are you ready? It's submission. Just like the word follower, submission carries shadows of passivity, weakness, manipulation, and even abuse. In my study of leadership so far, the few uses of the word submission I have come across were used in a way that either assumed this negative connotation or were used as if the word were synonymous with conformity, which it is not. These are broken and incomplete understandings of submission. So, for the next few minutes here, let's talk about reframing our understanding of submission by re-understanding what it actually is. And hopefully, by the end of this, you will remember why all of this is so important to our understanding of leadership. I'm going to define submission as a voluntary posture of coming under or yielding an acknowledgement of the worthiness of another's goal or purpose. Note that this definition establishes submission as a choice, and it also assumes self-placement. Submission does not have to be passive. It can be an active, committed, critically evaluated decision to be under the authority of another person because you trust their wisdom and discernment. It can be out of faith and not fear, knowing that your leader has your best interests at heart. It can be a strong decision, anything but weak. It is also important to remember that submission is a source of power for followers. A person cannot be a leader without followers who submit to them. Submission is also not a rare occurrence. It can be found in the everyday. As a student, I submit all the time. I submit to my teachers and their extensive knowledge about a given subject. I submit my time to their teaching, and I submit my homework and tests for their judgment and correction. I submit to the university by paying tuition and obeying their policies. Outside of school, I submit to my employers by obeying their instructions and operating within the boundaries they have established. And within all of these other situations, I submit to my own beliefs and values, but more on that later. None of these things, teachers, institutions, or even religion, would exist without submission in some way, shape, or form. Do you follow me? Oh, and on that note, let's look at how you guys submit. It's not just me. Traffic laws? Do you stop at red lights and stop signs? Hopefully. That's submission. And even if you don't stay under the speed limit, I bet you still stay under the local custom that says a maximum of 10 over is okay on a main road. That's submission. And right now, you're agreeing to stay off your phones and listen to me and my crazy ideas up here. That's submission. Now, I believe that submission exists on a sort of spectrum. On one end, you have the choice to submit, and on the other, you have the choice to not resist. So, to further our understanding and acknowledgement of submission, let's look at that opposite, resistance. Resistance is choosing to take a posture that does not come under, but rather comes against or opposes the purpose of another. Rebellion is almost the same idea, the difference being that resistance is refusal to submit, and rebellion is the withdrawal of submission. Now, the choice to resist or rebel can be a difficult one to make, and often the consistent, committed effort to do so can be intimidating or even downright terrifying. But even in situations in which it appears that followers have no power, they have the choice to submit or resist. There are examples of this throughout history, too many to count. Any major event with the word revolution in the title qualifies as an example of this idea. There are also numerous examples in pop culture. For example, let's look at Star Wars. Fun fact, there are over 185 hours of Star Wars movies and shows. 185. That is over a week of non-stop Star Wars. And what's the central theme in all of the installments to this epic saga? Resistance, rebellion. What happens when strong people decide to stand up against a corrupt power source? But even in situations of resistance and rebellion like this one, there is not a total absence of submission. It's not a question of whether or not you are submitting, but rather unto whom or what you are submitting. For example, going back to Star Wars, at a foundational level, the rebels are choosing not to submit to the Empire, but rather are submitting to their value of freedom and their belief that the Empire is corrupt. This is the idea of submitting to a purpose, goal, value, or belief as the ultimate leader in a scenario, an idea that was introduced as far back as the 1920s and 30s by Mary Parker Follett. With this assumption, even the leader of a group is submitting to something. Now, this is a more abstract kind of submission, so it is harder to observe, but it is definitely still there. This then begs the question whether it is possible to not be submitting to anything, a question we don't have time to really get into today. However, I do think it is important to briefly examine the consequences if a leader were to believe this is true. If a leader does not understand, acknowledge, believe, admit that they are also submitting to something, just like their followers are, and therefore they believe that they are the end-all be-all, they will be consumed by destructive arrogance and their whole group will fail. This is why it is so important to start the conversation about submission. We have to acknowledge its presence, or we are setting up our leaders and therefore our groups to fail. And yet this ultimate failure that is guaranteed by the avoidance of the conversation, as well as the profound aspects of leadership that it can shed light on, have still not been enough motivation to begin the conversation. Despite the efforts to circumvent the idea, there is no leader-follower relationship without submission. We must expand our perspective on what it means to submit by exploring what it means for a follower to weigh the options of submission and resistance, what actions from either party cause submission of any kind, and where the line is between trusting, committed, and confident submission and submission out of fear or coercion. This topic may be uncomfortable, difficult, and a little bit ugly, but I believe it will yield outstanding results, revealing new information within the field of study, as well as incredible growth within those who are willing to dive in. But I need you to dive in. I'd like to end with one of my favorite quotes as an urgent request. This is from Daniel Nayeri in his autobiography, Everything Sad is Untrue. Let's agree to have a complicated conversation. Thank you.